I sprayed a couple coats of lacquer sanding sealer over the whole front to seal in the touch-up that I did. I will sand that down a little bit and brush on some more to fill in the voids. I want to make this surface perfectly level, so all those cracks will disappear as they get filled in with lacquer. So that leaves the rest of the cabinet. Now, of course, I got a big challenge here because I can't just slop a bunch of stripper onto this because I don't want to risk ruining the front. So what I think I'll do is try scraping it off. You can see most of it's gone already, at least on the top. So I imagine this will scrape off pretty darn easily. And this isn't even a particularly sharp razor blade. I gotta go dig out a fresh one. And yeah, I think that'll scrape off no problem. Of course, it'd be even easier to do when I'm not holding a camera in one hand. You should really wear some eye protection if you're going to try doing something like this, because these little flecks of old finish tend to go flying. I just finished stripping the cabinet. And a couple things I need to deal with. One is got a bit of a split here, so I need to glue and clamp that. And two, you see the top is discolored compared to the sides. And that's because the top had no finish for probably a very long time, and I got exposed to the elements. So what I'm going to try doing is steaming it a bit with a damp cloth. Because there's also some dings and hacks, and I'm hoping I can raise those out with a little steam. But I'm also hoping the steam will bring out some of this dirt. Alright, so I've got the cabinet stripped down. After scraping it, I gave it a little wipe down with this commercial stripper and some steel wool, just to see if I get these stains out any better, and that had no effect. So what I'm going to try is an old trick, which is to use bleach. There are commercial lighteners or stain removers out there too, but I've read that bleach is pretty darn effective, so I'm going to give it a try. I'll brush it on, and the articles I read online said that it can take quite a while, hours maybe. So I'll put it on and see what happens. Here's the cabinet after a few rounds of bleaching. After the bleach, I neutralized it with vinegar, washed down the cabinet with clean water and let it dry, then lightly sanded with 220 grit, and here's where we are at. Stains are still faintly visible, but it's a whole lot better than it had been. So now I am getting ready to put on some grain filler using Constantine's, diluted it a little bit with mineral spirits. This is an oil-based filler. It's like ground glass or silicate with a bit of a tint, and I guess some kind of binder, and just brush it on, let it dry to a haze, and scrape off the excess. Traditionally they use burlap, but these days I just use an expired credit card against the grain. So the idea is this is a very finely ground substance, and this will get down into all the pores, kind of like tile grout. You scrape off the excess, and it should leave you with a very smooth surface. I won't start scraping till this dries to kind of a grayish color. I let the grain filler set up for a couple days after scraping off the excess, and then I sanded it down with some 320 grit sandpaper. Now I'm going to spray a little lacquer sanding sealer on it, give it another light sanding, and then switch to some toner lacquer. The lacquer sanding sealer has dried to the point where I can do a little light sanding and then move on to toner lacquer. I've pulled out a few possibilities here. I think I'll go with medium brown walnut for the main body here. It's obviously a little discolored in the center here from where it was stained, and then I bleached it. So what I'm thinking is if I give it a couple spurts of this right in the middle and then do the rest, I can blend that out. I also have some universal walnut I could give a try. This color is pretty much like this. I've used it on a few other radios in recent videos. It's a just standard common brown color you see in a lot of Philco radios. Now for the trim, along the bottom and the front, got extra dark walnut and Van Dyke walnut. It should be pretty darn dark and fairly opaque, so I want to cover up these repairs here. So I figure if I use enough coats of this stuff, it will be pretty darn dark and cover that up nicely. Not quite sure which I'll go with though. Yeah, we'll see. I think I'll start out with the Van Dyke walnut just for no other reason than I've got some and I want to use it up. But if it's not quite right, I'll maybe put a few coats of this over it. In the end, I went with extra dark walnut toner for the body, and I found some pigment-based opaque brown mahogany I used on the trim, and I went over that then with some universal walnut because I didn't really want this to look so much like brown mahogany as dark walnut. And it gives a nice contrast between the front, the trim, and the body. Alright, so I then sanded down the front a bit more, gave it a couple more coats of gloss. I think maybe one more round of sanding and gloss. So remember, this has a lot of crazing and alligatoring, and I'm trying to fill in all those voids with lacquer. The main body, a few more coats of gloss, and then just a little bit of rubbing out. It's pretty smooth. There's really no orange peel to deal with. Alright, now I'm working on the speaker grill. I just scraped and sanded away all the remains of the old paint, and now I'm getting ready to mix up just some basic water-based artist enamel. I got some burnt umber and some black. I want to make a nice dark brown. I'll just paint it on with a brush. If I slop on the front, I can just wipe it off with a damp cloth, or if it dries, sand it off, so I'm going to be sanding this front again anyways. After this dries, say overnight, you can put lacquer over it, no problem. I think that turned out quite nice. Now I'll let that dry overnight. And then light sanding on the front, as I said, a couple more coats of gloss all around. Let that cure for a day or so. One final round of light sanding on the front. Couple final coats of gloss, then I'll let this thing cure up for probably at least 2 weeks. The weather should be getting a lot warmer, so that'll really help to cure it faster. And then I'll rub the finish out. And one last thing I'll do is lightly sand around the grill area and brush on some semi-gloss, because I don't want this to be particularly shiny. Now if you're wondering why am I painting this now at all, why don't I do it as the very last step? Well, one, just to kill time while I wait for this fairly fresh lacquer to cure up. Just something to do, keep myself busy. And two, notice how the original paint had flaked off. That's because I believe it was done as the last step and there was no lacquer over it. I figure putting lacquer over it will protect it and help it stay on there a whole lot longer. I'm up in the attic right now spraying on what should be the final coats of gloss lacquer. In the past I've talked about how I'm waiting for the weather to warm up to spray lacquer, but more and more I've been actually waiting for it to get to be just right, as I've also had trouble spraying lacquer when it's too hot, because the lacquer dries so fast it doesn't have time to what they call flow out, meaning little droplets hit the surface and then flow together and make a nice even surface. So right now it's probably about in the upper 50s, low 60s up here, which I found to be really ideal when you're using these rattle cans of spray lacquer. Also, before, when I was doing the earlier coats on this, I was having the radio upright and spraying the sides when they were vertical and the top horizontal, which works okay, but I could never get the sides to be quite right because I just couldn't put on the lacquer that thick, otherwise it would run. Very tricky to get the right balance just so it's wet enough to flow out, but not so much it runs. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to do one side at a time. So did the other side a few hours ago, so it's dried, so I'm not worried about putting wet lacquer down on a flat surface like that. And now I just did one coat on this side. I'm going to do one more heavy coat. Let that dry for a little while, then flip it over and do the top, and then flip the whole thing this way. And the very last thing I want to do is the front surface. Let that cure for a few days and then rub it out, and that should be that. I finished spraying the cabinet last night, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It's about as good a job as I've ever gotten out of a spray can. Very little orange peel to deal with, especially on the front, which is the surface I most care about, because of course that's what people really focus on with the rather nice photo finish. Sure, you can still see the fine network of cracks down below in the original finish, but the actual surface is smooth, and that's exactly what I was going for. I thought that this was darn near perfect, except for one little problem. The inevitable stray eyelash fell into the lacquer as it was drying, so I'll let this cure up a little bit longer, then I'll have to sand that out and then spray that area again, which will get a little bit of overspray in the surrounding area, and I'll end up having to rub that out, sand and pumice stone and whatever to get it nice and smooth again. Otherwise, this should be done fairly soon.